Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. Where do relations with Pakistan stand, and has the nuclear suppliers group betrayed India? Those are two of the critical issues that I should explore today in an exclusive interview with the Foreign Secretary, Nirupama Rao. Foreign Secretary, let's start with Pakistan. There is a view that the resumption of dialogue with Pakistan has been more to Islamabad's interest than Delhi's. For one, it's lessened the pressure on Pakistan in terms of terror. It's allowed that country to raise Kashmir. It's raised the domestic profile of the government, and it's helped internationally. What has this process done for India?
Well, the process is of benefit to both countries. I don't think you can seek to create a profit and loss statement when it comes to relations between India and Pakistan in the current context. The fact is that the commitment to engagement is based on our shared geography, as Prime Minister said the other day in his conversation with the newspaper editors. And given the shared geography and the fact that there are enormous complexities in the relationship and there are problems to be resolved, it makes sense to engage, it makes sense to resume the dialogue, it makes sense to discuss the complex issues.
In other words, you're saying that talking to Pakistan is a necessity even if there aren't immediate gains from the talks from India's standpoint?
I definitely believe so, that this is a process that is going to take time. I think it would be impractical and unrealistic to expect dramatic breakthroughs just in one round of talks or two rounds of talks.
Let me put to you what critics of these talks process say. They say that the 2611 trial is stalled in Rawalpindi. The judge has been changed 4 times. You've been repeatedly asking for voice samples. You haven't got them and you have no idea when you'll get them. And most importantly of all, even the permission given by the Home Secretary in March for an investigative commission hasn't been taken up by the Pakistanis. So all you've got is verbal assurances, but nothing substantial and concrete.
You know, the point to ponder over in this context is the approach you take to these matters. There's no doubt that on the 2611 trial, we need satisfactory closure, as I mentioned in Islamabad the other day. We need progress in the trial. We need concrete results. There's no doubt about that. And those concerns have been adequately and more than adequately communicated to the Pakistanis even in this round. And let me tell you what...
Except, can I just interrupt? You aren't getting any progress. Your former Home Secretary, G.K. Pillai, to Retiff.com just a couple of days ago has said that the process hasn't moved an inch.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. From one angle, certainly it hasn't moved an inch. I'm not denying that. There's been a very glacial pace to this whole process as far as the 2611 trials are concerned. But let me tell you what kind of feedback we got from the Pakistanis at this round. And they spoke of the need to discuss all the serious and substantive issues between the two countries, and that terrorism was at the forefront of this.
In other words, you see a change in Pakistan's attitude?
I think the prism through which they see this issue has definitely been altered.
And you see that as a positive outcome?
I see that as an outcome that we must take note of, that we must take cognizance of.
In other words, this is a window of opportunity that we need to take advantage of.
I think when they speak of the fact that non-state elements in this relationship need to be tackled, that we must look at safe havens and sanctuaries, that we must look at fake currency, we must look at all the aspects that are concerned with the business of terror, I think that is a concrete development.
You're putting a positive gloss on what you heard from Islamabad when you visited recently, but let me put this to you. In May and June, there was enormous evidence brought by David Headley at the Tawhid Rana trial in America, which suggested conclusively ISI involvement in 2611. He provided proof of ISI funding, of ISI training, of ISI instructions. He even named Major Iqbal as his ISI handler. Home Minister Chidambaram said that this was prima facie proof of ISI involvement. But Rahman Malik, the Pakistan Minister of Interior Affairs, has gone on record to dismiss everything Headley said. He says the man is not trustworthy. So what you're getting is not positive outcomes, not positive responses, you're getting denial.
Let me say that we shouldn't read literal outcomes into all this. The fact is that we are engaging each other, India and Pakistan, on all issues, including the 2611 trial. And when I met my counterpart Salman Bashir in Islamabad a few days ago, these are the very issues that I raised with him.
You raised Headley and what Headley had said?
I did raise that, and I said we need to get satisfactory answers on these linkages.
Does Salman Bashir accept
what
Headley says?
Let me tell you, the aim here, and it's not just the aim of India, I think it applies to the whole global community. The strategic link between the Pakistani state and militancy and terror needs to be broken.
But to begin with, does Salman Bashir accept that there is a strategic link?
Well, he's not going to say that in so many words to me. I mean, I think it would be unrealistic for me to expect that the Foreign Secretary of Pakistan is going to say that in so many words. But let me say that the fact that we are discussing the threat, the scourge, the evil of terrorism, and the fact that it has ramifications that extend into the entire region, I think is a development we must take note of. I'm not being Pollyanna. I'm not trying to sound over-optimistic about this.
You sound very generous towards the Pakistanis.
I am not. I think that is again your interpretation, Karan. That is not my interpretation, and I don't believe that is the way diplomatic negotiations are transacted.
Can I ask you this?
I think we have to be realistic. We have to understand the difficulties in the
terrain. When you
terrain.
raised Headley, did he accept that Headley had provided proof of ISI involvement? His former Foreign Secretary Shahryar Khan was willing to accept it when he came to India. Does the present incumbent accept that what Headley said is trustworthy, or does he take the Rahman Malik line and dismiss it?
First of all, I think you're approaching this from the angle as if to suggest that the only focus of my discussions with Salman Bashir in Islamabad last week was the 2611 trial. There is a Home Secretary, Interior Secretary process which is underway. They've had a good round of talks. There are outcomes from those talks. There is follow-up actually in process at the moment. So I did allude to all this in my discussions, but we also discussed peace and security. We discussed the issue of Kashmir, which has always formed a part of the dialogue, let me say that. Somehow the impression is being created that, you know, we have given away the store by discussing Kashmir. Sir, I completely refute that allegation.
I totally accept that, and I'm very happy that you're talking so openly and fully about the discussions you had with Salman Bashir. Let me put to you what once again critics might say. They say on the one hand there is David Headley revealing in detail the nature of the ISI involvement in 2611. On the other hand, Pakistan's own investigations make no mention whatsoever of any connection between Lashkar and intelligence agencies and officers. Critical people like Sajid Mir and Muzammal Bhatt, the chief Lashkar military tactician, don't even feature in the charge sheet. And Pakistan has taken no steps to pursue the 20 fugitives wanted for their role as crew of the boat that sailed to Bombay. So Pakistan is verbally very reassuring, but when you look at the concrete steps that they are failing to take, the gap gets wider and wider.
I've said it and I say it again, we do need closure on all these issues. These are issues of paramount concern to India, and very legitimately so. And I think Pakistan is fully aware of this. The rounds of talks that we've had in recent months, and I refer especially to the Home Secretary level talks, have served the purpose of communicating and articulating these concerns very graphically to the Pakistanis. And the fact that we have sustained a dialogue on these issues, I agree with you, concrete results seem to be very far off. We haven't seen anything actually happening on the Mumbai trials, and that is a point of great concern to us. But you can, let me ask you a question. Does it mean that dialogue is not an option that we should pursue with Pakistan?
You know, this is very interesting that you should bring that very question up, because the point I was going to make is that as I hear you, and I suspect as the audience hear you, they will say to themselves that what the Foreign Secretary is really saying is that the previous position that India had taken after 2008 and 2611, that there can be no dialogue with Pakistan until there is substantive delivery on 2611 and terror, that position has changed. Even if the government doesn't admit it up front, the government has decided that now it can no longer refuse talks, it needs to engage with Pakistan in the hope that engagement will produce a result that earlier refusal to talk didn't produce. There has that change taken place, hasn't there?
I think you have to look at policy making in a dynamic situation. I don't think you're making policy in a laboratory. You take into account the surrounding environment. You take into account the success of a certain approach or not. Did that approach yield too many dividends? Well, you have to make your assessment of that. I think the decision to re-engage with Pakistan and to talk about the issues that divide us, that create a gulf between us, to reduce the trust deficit, as the two prime ministers said, I think is a very realistic approach to dealing with problems with Pakistan.
Absolutely, and it takes on board the fact that the world changes, time moves on, and policy needs to move on as well.
Especially for us in South Asia.
Let's take a break at that point. Let's come back and ask the question, has the nuclear suppliers group betrayed India? That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with the Foreign Secretary, Nirupama Rao. Foreign Secretary, let's come to the recent decision taken by the Nuclear Suppliers Group not to sell enrichment and reprocessing technologies to countries that haven't signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Would you accept that in effect this has nullified the clean waiver India got in 2008?
I think we are very clear about this development. The 2 points that I'd like to make. First of all, we've consistently underlined, and this is a fact well known to our partners, that the sanctity of the clean exemption that India was granted in the September 2008 NSG decision must be maintained, must be upheld.
That's your position, but they don't seem to share that position.
I'm coming to it. The second point is that full bilateral civil nuclear cooperation commitments that have been entered into between India and its various partners must be taken forward. And both these points, let me mention, have been recognized by our chief partners in this regard, by the United States, by France, by Russia.
I'll come to the United States, France and Russia in a moment's time. Let's first pick up on your point that the sanctity of agreements must be retained and preserved. That's your position. But the NSG has introduced a new paragraph 6 in its guidelines which stipulates specific criteria that recipient countries must meet before any NSG country can sell ENR technology. And the first criteria is membership of the NPT. That criteria alone disqualifies India.
First of all, let me say that these guidelines have not been published in open text as yet. We need to study that more fully, and we'll need to draw our conclusions from that. I'm not saying that these developments are welcome. I'm not in any way suggesting that this is something that we have not known and we have not fought all this time. We knew that there was a process.
And you tried very hard to prevent, and you failed to prevent as well.
No, it's not a question of failure. You have to look at this as a dynamic process. Let me say one thing very clearly, and I will repeat myself on this, that the international nuclear order will change in India's favor, and I'm willing to bet my money on
that's
that.
A hope. That's a hope.
No,
At the moment,
very
it's changing
about that.
against India's favor. Let me put it like this. When India got the clean waiver in 2008, it did so on the basis of certain specific commitments it made. It agreed to put several of its nuclear facilities under international safeguards. It publicly endorsed a whole set of non-proliferation conditions. It agreed to pass a nuclear liability law. India fulfilled all its commitments, but now, almost 3 years later, the NSG is wavering, it's diluting its waiver. Don't you feel let down?
Karan, nothing is set in stone here. I think you are jumping to very hasty conclusions. As I said, this is a dynamic process. We have to study these guidelines, there's no doubt about it. But let's look at the statements that have come out of the United States, France and Russia post the NSG
before you
decision.
come to France and Russia, let me quote you Anil Kokotkar, who was the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission when the waiver was obtained. He's gone on record to say this is a betrayal.
Well, I wouldn't use similar terminology as
do you feel
know,
let
as
down? Do you feel let down?
Professional engaged in this process. I think as the latest NSG decision is not the end of the road. It's not set in stone.
Well, how can you say that?
Let me say that.
Since you're not a member of the NSG, how can you say that?
No, I definitely am basing that on a knowledge of the situation as it exists.
So what
there is a balance of interests, there's a balance of commitments, there is mutual reciprocity involved. There are leverages that we can exert from our side also.
But what are the leverages
I'm not going to, I am not going to go into detail. Well, the whole issue of full bilateral civil nuclear cooperation, the fact that India has the potential to develop 60,000 megawatt of nuclear and electricity from nuclear energy by 2030. So this is a dynamic process. We have an expanding nuclear industry. This is a great attraction to the rest of the world.
Are you saying that India will not buy reactors from any country that refuses to sell ENR technology as well? Is that the leverage you have in mind?
We will defend our interests to the hilt.
Let me put it like this. You have great hope that countries like France and Russia will continue to sell ENR technology to India. The truth is that at the moment you don't have agreements with either that permit the sale of ENR technology. Both countries have committed themselves to reaching a further agreement. That further agreement has not been reached in either case. Now, with the NSG changing its guidelines, there's a real danger that France and Russia will never conclude an agreement that permits sale of ENR.
Look, I'm not going to draw a doomsday scenario from this. As I said, this is a dynamic process. Nothing is set in stone. This is not the end of the road. And as I said, there is a balance of interests and commitments involved. There are questions of reciprocity.
Is this just hope and brave talk?
No, certainly it isn't.
You sure it's not just diplomatic bluster, to use a colloquialism?
No, I don't believe in bluster. I believe in being diplomatic, definitely, but this is neither diplomatic bluster nor non-recognition of reality.
Let me tell you what people believe is your real hope. The Hindu says that in 2009, when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh went to Paris, President Sarkozy made a personal pledge that Paris would not be bound by any decision of the G8 or the NSG not to sell ENR technology to India. Does that pledge still hold today?
I think pledges deserve to be honored, and everything we are hearing from the French, from the Americans, from the Russians would suggest that their commitment to full bilateral civil nuclear cooperation, and keeping in mind, and let me say this, keeping in mind the clean exemption that was given to us in September 2008 will be taken forward.
But that's the past. You say pledges should be honored. Will this pledge be honored? Have you had confirmation from Paris that they stand by the pledge?
I have confirmation from both the United States and from France and from Russia that they stand by the commitments made to India in this regard, and that there is no dilution of these commitments.
But the problem is that the commitments they've made in their bilateral agreements do not include sale of ENR technologies. That is something that both countries have said that they will negotiate later. And the problem is that in Paris's case you have a pledge, which we don't know whether it's reconfirmed or not. In Russia's case, Russia has actually passed something called Decree 992, which they re-endorsed and renewed in December 2010, which does not permit sale of ENR to any country which is not an NPT signatory. So in Russia's case, there's an argument to say Russia is being almost duplicitous with us.
I don't believe Russia is being duplicitous. Russia is a long-time strategic partner, and I think the strategic interests in this relationship, the fact that this is a relationship that is rock solid, will prevail.
You're confident of that?
I am very confident, and
I'll tell you why.
I'm very clear about the strengths that we have. I think people seem to think that this is the end of the road. It's not the end of the road. It's not. I think we have a tendency to proclaim defeat at every such turn. So I think that is not the way. In situations such as this, which are dynamic situations, nothing is set in stone. Nothing is set in stone. Interests prevail, reciprocities prevail, commitments prevail.
And you're also saying that India's strength and leverage will prevail.
Absolutely.
Foreign Secretary, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Karan.